So those of you who've been in this channel for a while, I've been doing this sort of, I think one of the first videos I actually did on this channel was I was kind of getting annoyed at other content creators constantly talking about the backlog and how huge it was and the fact that there was 500 ships on the backlog. And at a certain point I kind of started thinking about it and said, there's not that many ships in the game, period. The backlog can't be that big. And so what I did was I went to the ship matrix and started scrolling through it and being like, well, there's ships that are in the backlog technically, but they're being worked on, or there's a reason why they're not in the backlog. And so I actually made a vid to kind of give some context to that. And usually about every 6 months or so, I'll roll out one of these videos where I start talking about it. This time I decided to grow it up a little bit rather than just clicking through these. Is usually what I'll do is I'll be like, the Aurora is in the game, the Aurora LX is in the game, in the game, in the game, in the game, in the game. This one's actually in the backlog, kind of like that. And then I would talk about this one's in the backlog because of reason X. This time I'm going to do something a little different. We've got this. So I'm going to do Photoshop. I already pre-gamed out all these things, so old backlog. And I'm going to break it into kind of a Venn diagram here of most ships will fall into one of three categories, at least one of three categories. And so either they're huge ships, they're complicated ships, and or the game loops or mechanics that would allow that ship to operate aren't in the game, so it would be pointless for CIG to roll them out. This time I have a couple bonus areas that I'm going to kind of go on. Being worked on means that they're currently in development. Full disclosure on this, I'm actually recording this during Invictus launch week because I am on vacation. So currently I'm on a boat somewhere in the Caribbean, but you guys are getting this now. So if they come out with some sort of thing that totally shoots this down and you're wondering why my information is so out of date, that's why. I'm not actually here right now. So welcome to Mike 2 weeks ago. But anyway, so there's ships that are being worked on, they're in active development. And then I kind of put another category out here. These are ships that are in the game, and this is by no means an exhaustive list. These are just ships that are fairly large, fairly common, well, in some cases fairly common, that are in bad need of a rework. Like they are extremely dated, and you can probably already imagine these kinds of ships in your head. I didn't include them all, again, in no means an exhaustive list, but just kind of a couple that kind of caught my attention, and I'll mention a few others. This time I thought it might be fun to go in reverse order, so we are going to start with the RSI or Astra. So this ship is huge, and it has, I wouldn't say it's complicated. It does have some moving parts. So, I mean, you could kind of drift it in here. I tend to say that most of the reason why it's not in the game is because, one, the concept just dropped a few months ago, so it's gonna be a while. They are working on RSI ships now. I would say it's in between the fact that it's large, but probably mostly because of game mechanics right now. We don't have refineries in the game, and there's not really a driving need for a super large miner in the game right now, or not super large. I guess super large would be the Orion. This thing is the Starfarer sized miner. We don't really need it in the game yet. Once Pyro drops, that might change, and the fact that this is RSI's year, it might start coming up on the ticker. So let's keep going. So here we've got the Zeus CL, which is the cargo variant. I'm going to put it over near being worked on because we know that it is going to be worked on as soon as the Zeus ES is out. they're going to work on the Zeus CL and then the MR. They've already said that that's the order. And so we'll probably be getting the CL by the end of the year. But right now, they're working on the Zeus ES. So this is the Explorer version. We know this one is in active production. We're probably going to be getting it within the next few months. I think they said 4.0. I wouldn't be absolutely shocked if we got it before then, but 4.0 somewhere around September, October, we'll be getting this ship, and they've been talking about how awesome it is. So we'll get the ES, then the CL, and then the MR, which is again going to kind of shove it over here because it is next in line. We know that their plan is to work on the Zeus series once they get there. Kind of in the same flavor is the Galaxy. Now, the Galaxy is a big modular ship. I would kind of put it on the line in the Venn diagram here because modularity is just now coming in as I'm saying this, that we're getting it for the Retaliator. This one has it in spades too. There's a refinery module, which again isn't in the game, so game loop mechanics. There's a medical module. The next level of medical isn't in the game yet, but will be coming soon. I'll have another video on that maybe by the time I drop this one. And cargo, which obviously cargo is in the game. That one will be the easiest module to do. I do think CIG will start going more towards modules and variants just because it's easier to knock them out, especially modules. Like you can make the ship and then you just sort of have this empty space, and then you can give a new dev this cube. You've got to fit whatever you can think of in this cube to fulfill a game loop. Go do it. It's got to fit in that shell. It's got to have a door here. And then you can kind of let them go wild, let them build on it, learn the different systems, use different asset packs, that sort of thing for certain developers. But anyway, we know the Galaxy is coming. It's just not going to be coming yet. Like the first thing they're going to work on is the Perseus, which will be near the end of the year. So IAE, they're saying, or 4.0, somewhere in there, depending on when those drop. Then they're working on the Galaxy. Then they're going to work on the Perseus. So this one's coming soon. So pretty soon it'll be shifting over here once the Polaris is done. But for right now, not in the game because it's huge. Game loop mechanics aren't really in. So the Spirit E1, this is the passenger mover of the Spirit. We have the C1 and the A1, so the cargo mover and the bomber. We don't have this one because passenger liners aren't in the game. We know they worked on it previously thanks to the progress tracker, which they're no longer updating at the moment, but we know they've worked on it in the past. It's a game mechanic they definitely want to implement. This thing has not been shoved out the door or had a pin put in it. It's just gonna wait until that game mechanic is up. I am assuming that game loop is waiting on server meshing to come along and the AI actually acting the way it's supposed to be, which we've already seen improvements this year with 3.2.3, but with 4.0 that should be even more evident that the AI will actually start acting the way it's supposed to. And once that happens, then they'll be able to start implementing things like the E1, and I would assume this would be the first ship that we would get that would implement that passenger mechanics, and then they'd start rolling it out to other ships like the Genesis Starliner. The Legionnaire. Okay, now the Legionnaire is the boarding ship. Interestingly, when John Crew, you'll notice that I'm putting it on the line. In theory, the Legionnaire is being worked on right now, and we know the ship itself, thanks to the monthly reports, it's it's getting there. It's like almost done. What this one's really waiting on, actually, I mean, I could put it like right here. It is waiting probably on hacking gameplay, and that is why it hasn't been quick rolled out. The ship itself is probably pretty close to done. I'd say close because there's obviously still a lot of things they've got to do to it at this point in development. Usually the last 10 yards are the hardest ones for the devs to get, because you got to make sure all of the screens work, all of the mechanics are integrated, all that sort of stuff. And this thing doesn't have the hacking mechanics, and they don't know what the hacking mechanics are necessarily going to be or what screens it'll entail. But in theory, the co-pilot, which sits right there, is the guy that will be doing the hacking while the pilot flies up. But anyway, Legionnaire being worked on most of the way there, but it's waiting on game loop mechanics. So even if the ship is finished, it's not going to be put in the game until they've got hacking in the game. The Expanse. So the Misk Expanse, and sorry, this was the best picture I could find of it. This is the refinery ship from Misk. Think of it roughly the size of a Vulture, I believe. So it's a little bit bigger ship, but even being a bigger ship, it is the entry level ship into refinery or refining. And that is going to be the last step of the mining game loop. And so they do want to get this out the door. It's just right now they're working on a whole host of other mechanics to get 4.0 out the door. After that, especially with Pyro, I would assume the next focus for game loops will probably be refinery, just to kind of close the loop on mining. Yeah, so that guy, not especially complicated, not huge, just waiting on the game mechanics to come along and the game loop to come along. Moving back in time again, we have the Odyssey. The Misk Odyssey is big. It's a really big ship. It's like Carrack size, but fatter. Has a huge hangar on it. In fact, you could sort of say that the hangar is probably the focus of the ship. It's much more industrial based than the Carrack is. It doesn't carry drones, but it does have, I think, like a size 2 or size 3 mining laser up front, and it can refine its own stuff. So actually, with that in mind, let's tuck it right down here. But it is mostly sitting in the backlog because of its size. Not a whole lot else to say about that one. It's not especially complicated outside of the fact that it's a very large ship. But it is kind of waiting on some game loops like refining. Next up is the ship that I think will probably be one of the most useful ships in the game, is the Liberator. Obviously, this one is there because of its large size. I would actually kind of put it on the edge of large size, because while its size is very big, it's not an extremely complicated ship. Like, you look at the geometry on it, it's got a bunch of flat shapes, a few circular shapes for or cylindrical shapes for the engines. It's got 2 tiny living areas to either side. This thing's kind of the natural step up from the Hercules line. It's the pocket carrier, so 3 ships can land on it, or I guess 1 larger ship and 1 smaller ship. And then it's got a hangar on the inside that a ship could go in there, or like ground vehicles could be in there. This thing will easily be able to carry tanks and stuff. But this is a landing vessel, pocket carrier. It's big. I think it would be very easy to knock this one out as an easy win. We haven't heard anything on it. As far as we know, they're not working on it. It would make sense to roll this ship out soon after Pyro, just to get people with starter ships around. It's also a good base of operations without beating this one to death about how much I think the ship is good. Yeah, we haven't heard anything on it, so they're not working on it. Being worked on are the ones that we know that they're working on or in the direct pipeline. So the Gatok Relian. So we have gotten a ship from Gatok. recently with the Sulian, which kind of set the design language for the Gatak. We knew that they did a sprint on the Railin not too long ago, about this time last year, I want to say. And apparently, maybe a little bit earlier than that, like February or so of last year, they kind of had like a few months sprint on the Railin. And I think what that did was built up enough assets that they could actually build the Sulian to kind of knock it all together and be like, okay, this is the vision for Gatak, for the Xi'an, and what we want the interior of these ships to look like. So now that they have that basis, the Railin will be a little bit easier to knock out. And I'm going to come back to this one a little bit later, and those of you who've watched this show for a little while, you can probably guess which one I'm going to be talking about. Plus, I'm planning on recording another vid after this that I plan on releasing before this that'll be talking about that subject, so you probably already know what that is. Anyway, Gatak Railin, larger ship, about Starfare sized, complicated, a lot of moving parts. It's alien, and it'll be one more step up from the Sulian, so one more solidifying factor of this is how an alien species thinks about space. And I don't mean space like the vast darkness, I mean like living spaces. Which that's something they need to nail the first time. They don't want to have to do this, release a Xi'an ship a couple years from now that feels completely different on the inside, that feels like it's a different race, and then have to go back and redo the Railin because they're all like, oh, no, this is what Xi'an think about. Anyway, Railin. It's there because it's larger, but mostly because it's complicated. It's a cargo mover. It's not because of game loops and mechanics. The Perseus. So the Perseus is a larger ship, and again, kind of falls into the same category as the Galaxy. It is next in line, so it'll be Zeus, Galaxy, or I'm sorry, Polaris, Galaxy, and then Perseus. So the Perseus is a larger ship. It's not as, I don't think it's as large as the Galaxy. I want to say it's shorter than that, but stocky, bigger ship. So huge is probably the wrong word, but it is kind of, it's in line to be worked on. So actually, let's do this, because these guys kind of belong there. This one a little bit more towards being worked on. There, that sort of fits my my view a little bit better. That this one is definitely big and complicated, waiting on game loops, but it's the next one to be worked on than the Perseus. Wouldn't be surprised if the Perseus jumped it. This and the Nautilus, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, actually 2 ships from now, were ships that I consider dark horse for Squadron 42, because lore-wise, it's a very old warship. And then they just went through and they retconned the lore on the Polaris so that it could be a Squadron 42 asset, which is another reason why they're working so fast to get it out, because I think it'll probably be in the climax of Squadron 42, or at least Chapter 1 of Squadron 42. They'll probably have a big fleet battle against the Vanduul, and I would assume we'd see the Polaris there, since it's now also a Squadron 42 asset, which is relatively new. Moving on up, we got the G12, which is one of those, I'm gonna again kind of put it on the edge of being worked on. We know they did a pass on it last year. They were working on it. Again, without the progress tracker, we can't tell what work they've been doing on it since. When John Crew had the opportunity to talk about what ships they were working on, he did not mention the G12. So as far as we know as of this recording, they are not working on the G12. But they did work on it for a bit. It's a ground vehicle somewhere between Cyclone and Ursa size. Not super complicated, probably easy win for some point later in the year. Wouldn't shock me if they if they put Montreal on it and just sort of said knock out all three. Again, there's three versions of this. There's with a lot of these vehicles, they have cargo, anti-air or combat, and racing. So this one, cargo, anti-air, and racing, they got all three. Anyways, not a hugely complicated ship, not a big ship, obviously. Game loops are in the game for all three of those. It's just kind of on pause right now while devs are working on other things, presumably getting Squadron 42 out the door and tightening up some of the ships. The same team that would be working on a lot of the sort of final aspects of these things are also, from what I understand, the people that are doing things like master modes and engineering integration and things like that. So same team is doing that. Spread a little thin. They'll come back and tackle ships like this eventually. So, like I said before, going back to ships that are old. So, like the Perseus, the Nautilus is a mine layer. And if I recall correctly, I don't know if it's as old as the Tavaran Wars, but it's certainly as old as the Xi'an Cold War. But I was thinking that this ship might be a dark horse to get into Squadron 42 just because of its age. Again, solidly, I actually, this one might be the first one that starts to drift into complicated because it's got to release mines. It's got to be able to capture mines. That's also game loop and mechanics. It's a very large ship. So this one starts to close into the middle of that Venn diagram. Not a whole lot else to say about that. It's a cool ship. I have an upgrade from my A2 to a Nautilus because I think the Nautilus fits my idea of the fleet much better. But anyway, Nautilus, that's kind of why it's not being worked on. At the other end of the spectrum, we have the Ranger, which is the motorcycle. Again, comes in three categories: cargo, racing, and combat. From what I understand, I am going to actually put this one in complicated. From what they have said about the Ranger is they're trying to get the feel of two-wheeled vehicles right before they put it in the game. And anyone that's driven ground vehicles in this game, you know they have some issues with ground vehicle physics to begin with. Now put it where it has to be on two wheels and balancing, and you kind of get a whole different feel on that too. Yeah, it's I would not hold your breath for that one coming real soon, even given its size and stuff like that. If they can figure out, other games have figured out how to do motorcycles very well, like Cyberpunk, GTA, those kinds of games do motorcycles. There are plenty of games that do motorcycles. CIG doesn't need to get cute or reinvent the wheel here. Just do what other people are doing and you're fine. Although I'm sure they want to make it that you can actually fall over if you overcompensate, but CIG, man, I don't know. Ranger, right now, according to them, it's complicated. They're trying to figure out the two-wheel physics. The Kraken, you can imagine where that one fits. Now, the Kraken, of course, is a huge, huge ship. One of the largest that we'll have for players in the game. It is around Idris size, maybe a hair longer. Of course, you can land ships on it. 4 small and 2 large, 2 Cuddy size, or 1 Caterpillar across the whole thing. This thing is big. For the regular Kraken, I would just say the problem with it is that it's huge. If you get into the privateer, you start to lean down into game mechanics because they don't have stores in the game. I wouldn't say it's an overly complicated ship outside of the fact that it's huge, and so you got to make the whole thing. In that sense, it's complicated, but in the grand scheme of we don't know how to make this or that work, it's not. So I would say it's mostly due to its size, priorities, and then if you're talking about the privateer version, it's game loop and mechanics. They haven't done stores yet. moving further back in time, and this is surprising because I thought that this ship was actually after the Kraken. For whatever reason, I think of the Kraken as being a much older concept than I used to. This is the Apollo. We've got two versions of the Apollo. You've kind of got one that's more combat focused, the triage, and I forget what the other one is. This is the other one. The triage is the one that's more combat focused. I think it's got missiles or something like that. We are waiting on the next round of medical game loop, which I have a video keyed up on that too. Hopefully I'll be able to get that out before I go on vacation, which I'm planning on doing it this week, the week of Invictus, so you should have already seen it by now. If not, go looking for it. It should be out there. But anyway, next level of medical gameplay, they want to get that out, and this will probably be the ship to do it because this one has tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 beds, and so it would make sense to implement all of those mechanics with this ship. But right now it's waiting on game loop and mechanics. I know they have done some work on this, so I will put it out here. We don't know how much work they've done or if that was actual making the ship itself or if it was just kind of strategizing, this is how we want things to do. But we know they've done some prep work on this, which would make sense since this is our size year, but it's mostly waiting on game loop and mechanics. The Vulcan. So the Vulcan is kind of the AAA tow truck of the verse. It can roll up on you if you break down, do repairs with drones, which aren't in the game, so mechanics. It can do refueling, which is in the game, carry a little bit of cargo, rearm you, which isn't in the game as far as another ship being able to refuel your ship or rearm your well, refuel is, rearm isn't, outside of slapping guns on your ship. But it's mostly the drones that are probably holding this thing back, and just priority. There's not really a glaring need for this kind of ship in the game. I think once Pyro's been out for a year, they'll actually start rolling out ships like these two, because there will be a need for them. But anyway, they're not working on it, mostly waiting on game loop and mechanics till it can become relevant enough to start working on. Actually, you know, I would drift that one towards complicated a little bit because it does have the drones. Drones are going to make things complicated. All right, this big bad boy is solidly in the middle of the Venn diagram. This is the Pioneer, which is gigantic, can build bases, which game loop isn't in the game yet. It's complicated. It completely transforms. It builds things throughout this whole thing. You move in cargo and all kinds of supplies and materials for it, and it actually builds the base as it goes. Hugely complicated ship, huge ship. Game loop mechanics aren't in. Gonna be a while till we see this one. Okay, 600i, this one could actually go either one of these. It used to be solidly in needs rework categories, but we know they were kind of working on it at one point, got pretty far through white box and the planning stage, and then I think they just sort of said, hey, let's focus on RSI, get RSI up to snuff, out the door, then we'll focus on the next manufacturer and we'll kind of roll that way. Or let's get Squadron 42 out the door and then we'll have more devs available and we can start working on these things. We know they did some work on the 600i, quite a bit of work. In fact, I'm going to put it over here just so that I have that room available. Yeah, it was worked on for a little while. Now it's got a pen in it. We haven't heard anything else. John Crew did not mention it when he was talking about ships they are working on. So right now, the only ship we know they're working on is the Zeus EN and this guy, of course, the Polaris, which we've seen. The outside looks pretty far along, I would say. Inside is definitely getting there. End of the year, we should be seeing the Polaris. Not a lot else I can say about this. This thing has been the focus of the community for probably the last month or so, with good reason. Nothing I could say would change that. All right, another one in the center of the Venn diagram here is the Crucible. Crucible is a large ship. Actually, let's go ahead and switch those two up, because I would say this one is mostly huge and complicated. The Crucible is an end-game repair ship, and so this will be the ship that can basically use its little mechanical arms and fix up your Idris when it gets shot down. In fact, one of the concept images is exactly that. It also has a modular garage attached to it that in theory can fit, last we heard, a Hornet in it. Don't be shocked if that grows to fit something like a Freelancer. They have not confirmed that. They have not been working on the concept on this. They have not gone back and looked at it. That would just kind of be theory crafting, that this being the in-game ship would probably need to have a garage around that size, but who can say? The garage that's on the Odyssey, or the hangar that's on the Odyssey, is one of the larger ones that we've seen on another ship. So it makes sense that it'd be that size. Anyway, moving on. Not a lot else to say about it. They're not working on it. It's going to be a while. Another one in the it's going to be a while is the center of this Venn diagram is getting awfully crowded, is the Endeavor. So the Endeavor has a bunch of different modules. The front of it, which looks remarkably like the Odyssey, which if CIG isn't planning on making the Odyssey the sort of command craft of the Endeavor, they should probably think about that. Just kind of chop out the hangar, or don't, and make that the front of the Odyssey, just sort of make it a tow rig. But anyway, it's got all sorts of weird things that we're not going to see for ages. In fact, I would put it down towards this corner of the Venn diagram. Same with that one. Particle accelerator, a radio telescope, a giant hospital. Yeah, pretty much all of these things that CIG is going to be developing in 2 to 5 years from now are going to be things that the Odyssey will have, or not the Odyssey, the Endeavor will have. So we're not going to be seeing the Endeavor for a while. Really big ship, complicated. Game loops and mechanics aren't going to be in for a long while. Maybe when they tackle MISC, which I've been going on the theory that once they've kind of finished this RSI sprint, MISC would make the most sense for the next one, because I mean, you can kind of see they've got a few useful ships in there. They've got a big win like the Odyssey. They've got things like the Expanse. Ships like the Starfarer and the Freelancer are way out of date as far as the game mechanics in the game go. So it would make sense after RSI, you would do a MISC sweep. But anyway, this guy right here, yeah, Endeavor would be another one that you would probably put on the tail end of that. Kind of in the same category, we have got the Genesis Starliner. This one isn't an overly complicated ship, although it does have the Mix Master as one of the game loops as part of it. It is a bigger ship, but I wouldn't say it's a super complicated ship. It's mostly the game loops and mechanics, since it's in the same situation as the E1. It's waiting on passenger mechanics. Claim to fame on the Genesis Starliner is that it is Disco Lando's favorite ship. But other than that, really big ship, waiting on game loop and mechanics. Okay, just kind of wanted to throw this one out there. This is the Reclaimer. Reclaimer is, I believe, the first really big ship they put in the game. They put the Starfarer in the game, and then the Reclaimer came not too far along after that, like a couple years after that, they put the Reclaimer in the game long before Salvage came in. And that was I think that was one of the first wake up calls for CIG of, we need to not do that anymore. Like, people had a Reclaimer for years and it was just this big, slow thing that could move less cargo. I think less cargo than a Caterpillar. And so nobody would use the thing. Then Salvage came in and now it's like the money maker. So, yeah, it's, although I've heard the claw is not working in the current version of the game. I'm assuming that'll be patched by the time this video comes out. But anyway, Reclaimer, giant ship, but early ship, needs a lot of fixes, needs basically a rework. The internals are actually pretty decent, but like components need to be able to be easy to get to and get out. It does need some mechanics because it does not have its drones. It's supposed to have drones. I believe it carries 4 of them. For basically, you'd send out a drone to go in and pull components and stuff like that. So you don't have people going out EVA and having to do all that stuff. You'd send a drone. But anyway, needs a rework. The ship itself is fine. It's got strong Nostromo vibes, which is one of the reasons why Wolfie, one of the members of the Carnival, has it. Big Alien and Nostromo fan. Yeah. Similar age, we've got the Orion. Not sure I'd totally call it complicated. This one is mostly huge. I'd lean it towards game loop and mechanics just because we don't have the asteroids there big enough. But mining is pretty well refined, no pun intended. At this point, they know how mining works, and it's just a matter of iterating on that to create the larger sizes. And I'm sure they'll add another level of complexity for the really big rocks, which is what the Orion goes after. But mostly it's just a really, really, really big ship that doesn't really have a need in the game right now. You don't need a super miner in the game. They haven't released a system that is strongly aimed at miners. I think the Nyx system might be, and there's 90% possibility that Nyx is going to be the next system they drop after Pyro, because we already have Delamar, or have had it in the game in the past. So easy win there. I'm going to roll 2 ships together on this one. This is the whole D, but the whole D and the whole E both kind of fall into the same category. Actually, kind of a similar category to... That is not what I meant to do. Kind of falls in the same category as the Orion. It's just they're really, really big ships, and right now, even running the whole C, they don't really have the quanta in the game. They don't really have the back-end economy, isn't super working at the moment. Low priority to get the whole D and the whole E, which are a whole nother level of size beyond the whole C. Kind of on a different side here, again, a vehicle that actually doesn't fall into one of these categories that I have up here is the whole B. This thing is about freelancer size, but carries probably, I think like double the cargo of the freelancer. It's going to be a hell of a cargo mover at the sort of low end of the spectrum. So starter cargo mover, this thing's going to be great. It can land on planets fully laden, so it's probably not going to have this bottom arm like the whole A can, but it carries like 4 times as much cargo. It carries a ton of cargo. We haven't heard about it. We don't know if they're working on it. Maybe it'll be one of those ships that they roll out during Misk's year. Who knows? Right now, I think they've decided that there's enough ships that can move cargo in that area that there's not really a need to bust out the whole B just to get it in the game, even though it's one of the older concepts. And again, we're moving backwards in time, which of course lands us at the oldest concept that CIG has right now that they have not put in the game. And yeah, I did a whole video on this one, so I won't go into the reasons why this one isn't in the game, but it is squarely dead center of the Venn diagram. In case you didn't see that video, it's huge. Trading isn't in the game. Transport is, cargo moving is, but true trade where you've got a store and people could come in and be like, I want to buy that, but I don't want to pay that much money. And you could be like, well, you could pay me this much and give me that thing that you're carrying, and I'll give you this. So kind of player to player transactions, getting NPCs to realize that kind of thing. Beyond that, it's complicated because it is the ship for an alien race, and like I talked about in that other video, their approach to the internals of this ship, as cool as they were as disjointed as the 600i was when it dropped. And now they're kind of doing the whole 600i needs a rework thing. They don't want to have to do the same thing with the Banu Merchantman. So it's, if I had to guess, the way they'll approach the Merchantman would be similar to the way that they're approaching the Raylan, is that they will introduce a medium sized Banu ship. Like right now we have the Banu Defender, which kind of has an interior, but not much of one. But they can make something not quite Raylan sized, but something like Freelancer sized, that's more of a cargo focused ship rather than a combat focused ship that has a real interior, just to kind of nail down, this is what the Banu are, this is how they think. And I covered all this in that other video, so go watch that if you want my opinions on why they stopped production of the Banu Merchantman and why I think it's a good idea and why I think they should go one direction or the other. Anyways, moving on with the backlog. We're pretty much done with the backlog. Just I wanted to mention a couple ships here. The Caterpillar and the Starfarer both kind of fall into the same category as the Reclaimer, that they're older ships. They were released in the early days. The Starfarer was released back when they weren't sure if they'd actually be able to get ships actually flying around with interiors, so it was designed by an FPS level team, kind of trying to make like a almost like an deathmatch arena type level for the interior of a ship. And that's why that thing is so convoluted and has so many different ways to get from point A to point B, is because it was designed as an FPS level. It wasn't designed as a ship that you would be flying around and have to navigate. I mean, most people going through the back go up to the bridge and don't leave the bridge because the rest of the ship is just nightmare fuel to try and navigate. I mean, I've been playing this game since 2015 and getting around the Starfarer, I've had a Starfarer for most of that time. Getting around the Starfarer is still one of those, wait, crap, do I go left here or do I go up that little elevator? And yeah, needs a rework. Like, this whole thing just needs to be gutted. They've even said, yeah, the inside of that thing is a mess. We're going to take a look at it. They're not working on it now. It's probably sitting on sticky pads on someone's desk of, I'm going to do this, this, and this, or working in the back of their brain. It hasn't trickled up to actually being worked on in the game. Caterpillar's in a pretty good place. There are a few things it needs. Actually, I wouldn't even put it in needs a rework, but it does need the modularity. So they're going to be slapping in, the whole point of the Caterpillar was that modularity, like these 4 cargo pods there can be switched out for salvaging, for troop transport, not sure what else, like a dragonfly bay, medical, and the command module, the little place off to the side, that whole thing can break off and start flying on its own. They're not working on it right now, but they will be eventually. But that's kind of why I'm putting in the needs a rework. I think it doesn't have components in it either, which is a problem. But yeah, these ships need to kind of be really brought up to standard. The Caterpillar's decent as it is, but needs a tweak. So I kind of put it half on this line. But gang, that is it. So that is what the backlog looks like with all of the ships in the game. These are the ships that they're working on. You can see the vast majority of the ships are in the backlog for a reason or are actively being worked on right now. So when people are saying the backlog is hundreds of ships and stuff like that, they're either just parroting a number that they heard, they're exaggerating because they're frustrated that their ship isn't out or isn't being worked on. It's not in this circle. Or they just don't know and they're just kind of throwing out a number because they need clicks, would be my guess. That might be 50% of them. But anyway, this is what I see on the backlog. Let me know what you think below, and I will respond when I get back. Thanks, gang. Catch me next time.